This is our presentation about the Great Depression and the New Deal, and then we kind of went into our, specific person spotlight more on Eleanor Roosevelt and her activism in that. So we're going to get started.
So I'll be talking about the social movement about the New Deal movement, which originated in response of the Great Depression, which began in 1929 and lasted until 1940. The movement was prompted by severe economic problems, including high unemployment, poverty, and economic instability, affecting various groups across the United States. By 1933, unemployment rates soared to over soared to over 20%, with many families losing their primary breadwinners. Urban areas, particularly industrial cities like Detroit, experienced severe job losses, leading to widespread poverty and homelessness. Um, cha- Farmers faced significant challenges due to falling crop prices and natural disasters like the Dust Bowl, which devastated agriculture land and livelihoods. The economic crisis led to increased migration as families looking for work uh, for work elsewhere, often moving to cities or other states in search for better opportunities. This migration sometimes resulted in social tensions and conflicts over resources. Key events and social issues that caused the New Deal included the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, Public Works Administration, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Major issues and demands. The major issues or demands of the movement during the Great Depression and the New Deal period were primarily focused on economic recovery, job creation, and social welfare. The movement aimed to address the widespread employment, poverty, and economic instability that characterized the era. Key demands included economic recovery. The movement sought to stabilize the economy, restore economic growth through government intervention and reform, job creation. There was a strong demand for programs that would create jobs and provide employment opportunities for those who were unemployed or unable to work. Social welfare. The movement advocated for the establishment of social safety nets and welfare programs to provide support to the unemployed, the elderly, and the disabled. Labor rights. There was a push for labor rights reforms, including the right to unionize and collective bargaining rights. Economic reform. The movement called for comprehensive economic reforms to address the root causes of economic instability and to ensure a balanced economy. These demands were articulated through various programs and initiatives, including the New Deal, which aimed to provide immediate relief and long-term economic stability. The movement's efforts were instrumental in shaping the policies and programs that would define the post-World War era. Leaders of the movement was Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected as the 32nd President of the United States in 1932 during the height of the Great Depression. He campaigned on the promise of a New Deal for the American people, which aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform to address the economic crisis. Upon taking office in March 1933, Roosevelt quickly enacted a series of programs and reforms known as the New Deal. His first 100 days in office saw the introduction of significant legislations aimed at stabilizing the economy, restoring public confidence, and providing jobs for the unemployed. Established of the New Deal, President Roosevelt initiated the New Deal in 1933, aiming to stabilize the economy and provide to relieve the unemployed and poor. and Public Works Administration. This program launched numerous large-scale public works construction projects, creating jobs, enhancing infra- infrastructure across the country. Civilian Conservation Corps, established to provide jobs for young men. The the CC engaged in conservation and developed projects, instilling a sense of pride in environmental stewardship. The Social Security Act, enacted in 1935, this act established a system of old age benefits, unemployment insurance, and an aid for depend de- sorry and aid for dependent mothers and children, fundamentally changing America's social safety net. Agricultural Adjustment Administration, these actions not only provided immediate relief, but also laid the groundwork for significant changes in American society and government intervention in the economy. Significant changes in society and the social welfare system, government role, the New Deal expanded the government's role in the economy, providing relief and support to the unemployed and poor. Social, social welfare programs then established of the establishment of programs like the Federal Emergency Relief Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps marked a shift towards direct financial aid and job training for the unemployed. Economic recovery, the New Deal's program aimed to restore the economy to normal levels and prevent a repeat depression with initiatives like the Tennessee Valley Authority, promoting economic development. Political realignment, the New Deal coalition of labor unions, blue-collar workers, and other groups shifted the Democratic Party base, leading to a powerful liberal coalition that dominated presidential elections into the 1960s. These changes not only addressed immediate needs, but also laid the groundwork for a more resilient and equitable society. The lessons learned from the Great Depression and the New Deal continue to resonate today, reminding us of the importance of collective responsibility and the necessity of the safeguarding and the well-being of all citizens in the time of crisis. First major policy from the New Deal movement, the Emergency Banking Relief Act, enacted on March 19, 1933 by the President Franklin D. Roosevelt and passed by Congress. The law aimed to stabilize the collapsing banking system after thousands of banks had failed during the Great Depression. It authorized the federal government to inspect all banks and reopen only those that were financially sound. It gave the president power to regulate banking transactions and foreign exchange. It restored public confidence by assuring citizens that their money would be safe once banks reopened. And did the policy address the problem? Yes, it successfully stopped the panic and restored faith in the banking system. Within days of Roosevelt's bank holiday, the passage of the act, people began depositing money into banks instead of withdrawing it. This was an important step in stabilizing the economy and rebuilding trust. The limitations of policy was mainly a short-term emergency measure. It didn't solve deeper economic issues such as unemployment or poverty. It also did little to help people who had already lost their savings before the banks closed. Broader financial reforms like the Glass-Steagall Act and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation were needed later to create lasting protections.
Okay, so before we get into talking about Eleanor Roosevelt and her work specifically in activism in the Great Depression, I want to talk about kind of specifically what went into causing the Great Depression itself, um, and the issues that impacted American society that she wanted to work on. In the Great Depression, I mean, when I was a kid, I was taught that it was just because people had too much money and they spent all of their money and there was no more money to spend. But it was a lot more complicated than that. Prior to the Depression, people did spend a lot of money. It was the Roaring Twenties, right after World War I. Everyone was really excited to be in this new, fun, kind of modern world. But we know today that there were quite a few things that caused the downfall to the recession. And I would like to mention at this point that it was more than just America that had a Great Depression. The Great Depression was a worldwide event, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that happened. We have here the three main things I'm going to talk about that went to this. Number one being the stock market crash of 1929, then the bank panic, and then international bank issues as well. So, the stock market crashed because of many different things. Stock is a complicated entity in itself. In its simplest terms, the market functions by allowing individuals to invest their money into owning a portion of a company. This goes to helping the business raise funds to continue profiting. The individuals in, buying stock make money kind of by selling it between themselves. So, at the time, 1929, well, 1920s, I should say, World War I had just ended. We were more of a globalized country. There were a lot of businesses booming. So with a lot of businesses coming, it was very helpful to these people to be able to make money by selling stock of their companies to people who wanted to invest to help them grow. So the easiest way to develop real wealth tends to be to create a diverse investment portfolio or a group of investments and to let it sit over a long period of time before selling the shares. This wasn't widely understood when the stock market became what it was. It was by the experts, but not by people who were still selling stock, right? Because they wanted you to buy a bunch of stock. A lot of people saw it as a very get rich quick scheme. People spent a lot of their money on stocks. This made the prices very high. And at the time, people were thinking, well, this is great because then I can buy high stocks and they're going to get, the trend's going to keep going up. But it didn't, because people took loans and all of their savings out of banks to do this, because my friend had talked about how people, there was a banking crisis because a lot of people lost a lot in banks, and then people had to rebuild their trust in banks. One of the big reasons is because, well, stock people didn't want citizens to know that taking out loans to buy stock was not cool. They did want people to take out loans. So, to try and get people to invest their loans in a safer situation, because stock is unprotected and therefore volatile, the banks decided to raise the interest loans on their interest rates on the loans taken out. This really had unwanted effects. The stock market probably would have crashed in the next couple of years without this happening, because it was so much of people just putting money into it really quickly and not really understanding it. But when the interest rates went up, it caused people to panic, and then they withdrew their share in stock. So they sold it. This made prices go way, 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 way down. And then people are obviously going to sell the rest of it because it's really down, and they see that this wasn't a good idea, and they took out a loan to pay for this, and now they have a loan that they have to pay back. So the stock market prices plummeted. This made a lot of businesses obviously fail because their investments were withdrawn. The rise in interest also made other banks around, not even the ones kind of involved in the stock market, raise their prices on interest rates to keep up with the market. People then super panicked because banks were stealing their money essentially and took all their money out of the banks as well. So that kind of messed that up globally. Banks all over the world kind of were impacted by this, by reacting really quickly to the American decisions and issues at the time. Had a lot to do with the fact that America was bringing in so much gold at the time that it was threatening countries' currency that was more based in the weight and worth of gold. So globally, They just weren't having a great time. This also caused farmers to overproduce their crops because they weren't selling in America because no one had money to buy anything, and they weren't selling overseas because no one had anything to buy over there. And it's cheaper to get your stock from inside the country instead of shipping it. It continued, the Great Depression, so long because the nation was in a cycle of where it would lower costs, which then lowered the income of people making money off the costs, which then made them not be able to afford the costs that were lowered in the first place. So, Hoover, the president at the time, I have a picture here of some little boys talking about how he's making it worse for them. He did not believe in federal aid. He laid off a lot of employees, and his idea to fix the problem was to just spend a lot of money in construction projects and like otherwise projects to try and give people jobs, but that ended up not working really well either.
So, for some background for Eleanor, she was born October 11th in 1884 in New York City and passed away November 7th in 1962 at the age of 78. She and Franklin D. Roosevelt had six children: Anna, Elliot, James, Franklin, and John. Um, Sadly, one of their sons, Franklin Jr., died as a baby, but they later named another son after him in remembrance. Eleanor Roosevelt holds the record for the longest serving First Lady, spending 12 years in the White House. She was first educated by private tutors, and at the age of 15, when she went to school in England at Allenswood Academy, where she played varsity field hockey. She also made history as the first lady to hold a press conference, which she did just 2 days after FDR's inauguration, and this showed an early on how involved she planned to be for in political and social issues.
So prior to performing kind of the big activism she was known for, she was fairly uninvolved in politics, especially notably during the women's suffrage movement before her time kind of becoming this big worldwide feminist leader. Um, in later years, she would say that she was devoting this time to taking care of her kids. Her kids were younger at the time of the suffrage, as well as talking about how she spent this time as her own political education into how social matters could be changed and just the nature of when you can tell society needs to change. She talked a lot about this in her book, her autobiography that she wrote. Um, but during FDR's presidency, their youngest children were teenagers, but they had left for college at the time. Um, and she had gained education and interest in politics through the women's suffrage movement. So when she performed that press conference, she was the first to do it. She was the only first lady who had ever held a press conference. And during the implementation of the New Deal, she worked very closely with advocates in society, as well as just people who were really suffering, to create a deeper understanding in herself and her husband in the issues so that she could influence the New Deal policies to be as progressive as she was possibly able. So her political ideology was really, really different from anything that had been done before. She believed that men and women were different. She believed that there were inherent biological and social differences, but that was a very positive thing that meant that women were inherently going to be progressive and they inherently should be in politics because they were mothers and they had this side of them that was meant to kind of take them to that place where they wanted to help people and to further social rights, which was super new. Before it was either, we're equal or we're not. So that was kind of how it was. It was never we're equal, but in different ways. And that's kind of what she got out there. She considered herself a feminist because she did believe in women in the workplace. She believed, and she didn't believe that we as women were not equal to men. She believed inherently that those differences made us equal, but better at different things, more prevalent in different things. So she saw herself as a feminist as well as an activist. She worked on the ground with people on the ground during the Depression. So in America, people who weren't in Washington, in the White House, in political positions, she worked with real people who suffered, who were really, really struggling at the time, to inform FDR's on issues he refused to even acknowledge otherwise. Past the New Deal reform and even FDR's presidency, Eleanor worked really hard on African American activism, which is something that not a lot of people, much less first ladies, did at the time. Her methodology, which is something I find really interesting because Eleanor Roosevelt is not necessarily talked about as an advocate. She is talked about as a first lady and a very prominent one, but never kind of in her own way. At the time, this was very, very different because her methodology, a lot of it was that she was the one doing these things, whether intentional or not. A lot of the changes she brought forth were simply because she was a woman who understood things and publicly let people know she understood things and wanted things to change. She was a woman in the public who had an opinion and was well informed. That was the difference because people didn't see women as being capable of this at the time. She was a big fan of community engagement, talking about these press conferences, activism on the ground, that kind of thing. Yeah, and just being a first lady, the wife of a powerful man who had her own opinions and her own career in activism. Huge, huge at the time. She cared a lot to be out with people. She cared a lot to listen to people. And she was, at the time, very, very, very progressive. And she believed in radical social and welfare reform. About the Social Security Act, when it came out, she is quoted as saying, not quoted, I'm not going to say an exact quote, but she expressed an opinion about it being that this is a wonderful start. She's like, I want to see more reform for mothers and children. I want to see more reform for African Americans. She said, I want to see more reform. And while FDR kind of stopped short at the end of his presidency, Eleanor went on to do a lot for the country and for kind of society in the way they felt about women as a whole and activism.
During the New Deal, Eleanor encouraged President Roosevelt to make programs focused on helping ordinary people. She also promoted jobs on helping on education and opportunities for both women and the youth, including the creation of the National Youth Administration. She would often travel around the country to see how relief programs were working and gave detailed reports back to FDR with suggestions for improvements. Her advocacy helped shape the idea that social welfare should be a government's responsibility. She also supported programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which gave young men paid work during the Great Depression. Another major focus for her was fair access. She worked to make sure that everyone benefited from New Deal programs too. Eleanor's influence still shows up in our social welfare today. Her belief in fairness and inclusion helped inspire programs like Social Security and unemployment benefits. Many current ideas about the government support for families, youth, and minorities come from her early advocacy. Her work also inspired leaders to focus on equality, human rights, both in the US and around the world. Overall, Eleanor Roosevelt helped shape the lasting belief that the government should protect people during hard times, which is an idea that continues to guide social policies today.
Okay, and thank you guys for listening to our presentation. We're going to upload this to Blackboard and I will upload the slides with it so you can look at it if you have any questions. Thank you.